It's really interesting. I think the date and the announcement has taken a lot of people by surprise, not only in politics in Westminster, but also I'm not sure there are many people who had an election date sweepstake bet on for July. There's a couple of reasons. One is that the economy is looking slightly better. And so one of those 5 targets that Rishi Sunak set himself was to halve inflation. And so he feels like he's probably starting to hit that. There's also speculation that, of course, we've got the Euros coming up, and that sense of optimism and hopefully some good weather might be better for the Conservative Party than an October, November sort of wintry election.
Hannah, you know far more about this than I do. I've followed it for most of my life as well. Does this feel like a 1979 stroke a 1997 moment? You'll know what I mean by those two moments in British political history where we saw decisive changes with the Thatcher administration and the Blair administration coming in as well. Less so in 2010 because, of course, we needed a coalition. But does it feel like a meteoric shift kind of election coming?
Whatever happens, it definitely will be a historic election, because if the Labour Party are to achieve that 20 points ahead in the polls and to get that landslide Labour majority, they need a 12.7% swing to get a majority of just 2, and they need to win an additional 125 seats, I think it is. Now, that in itself would be an historic victory. So whatever happens here, I think it is going to be an election that we are talking about for quite some time. Whether it is because Labour win a landslide and because the Conservatives are wiped out, as some commentators are sort of expecting, I'm not 100% convinced on that just yet, because we've had local voting recently. Of course, we've had our local elections just a few weeks ago. And while the Conservatives did very badly in those, the real winners there were smaller parties and independents rather than Labour. So if that translates to a general election as well, then that Labour landslide is looking much less certain. And even if they were able to achieve that, it would be a historic result.
Hannah Arabile here out of 10 Downing Street, and you make a very important note there. And my question, I suppose, is really just with regards to whether this would be, if the polls are to be believed, a vote necessarily against Labour as opposed to a vote for, rather a vote against Conservatives as opposed to a vote for Labour, i.e. ultimately Conservatives having done themselves a disservice here in order to get to this point.
Yes, I think there's a lot of expectation that there's going to be tactical voting at this election. So in order to remove those Conservative MPs, people are going to be looking at either the Liberal Democrats or Labour as the main challengers. Again, that's not necessarily something that we have been seeing at the local elections. So in recent sort of voting patterns, because of course we must remember that we have new boundaries as well in this election, so we can't directly compare to 2019. We have to use what's called notional results from Rollins and Thrasher. So in the votes that we have had counted that aren't opinion poll surveys, it doesn't look like the same enthusiasm for Labour that we might have seen in 1997, but it does definitely point towards people not being happy with the Conservative government.